Okay, it's 2 minutes past 7, so I'm going to start. There may be one or two still to join us. So a very warm welcome, first of all, to everybody. And I should apologise that it's Burns night, and we did swither about whether it was wise to hold a meeting like this on Burns night. People have probably got something more exciting to do, but it looks like we've got a bunch of people, so that's great. And thank you very much for joining us. Before I go any further, let's just start with some introductions. So my name's Andrew Thinn. I'm chairman of the Scottish Land Commission. Have done many other things over the years, mainly in the public sector. Also at the moment, actually, I'm a Crofters Commissioner and Crofting Commission Commissioner. Previously, I was chair of Scottish Canals, chair of Scottish Natural Heritage, and various other things. Let me just ask the others from the Land Commission to introduce themselves. Lauren, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name's Lauren MacLeod, one of the Land Commissioners. I'm based in Oban. I've been involved with land reform for the last 30 years. Prior to becoming a commissioner with the Land Commission, I was chair of Community Land Scotland, which is the representative body for community landowners in Scotland. And I was also for 6 years on the board of Storras Uist, which is the community landowner for the islands of Eriskay, South Uist and Benbecula and Outer Hebrides. So really pleased to be here this evening and looking forward to the discussion and debate later. Thanks a lot.
Lauren, thank you. So Lauren and I are the two board members we are appointed by Scottish ministers. Let me introduce the others who are here. So Hamish is our chief executive. Hamish, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, hi, I'm Hamish Trench. I'm Chief Executive at the Land Commission, so I lead the staff team at the Commission. We have a small staff team of 19 with our main office space in Inverness, and I live in Grantown-on-Spey. Thanks.
Thank you, Hamish, very much indeed. And next, a very new actually, member of staff, so I have promised her that I won't put her on the spot, but it's really good that she's joining us nonetheless. Nikki, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Nikki Nabler. I'm Head of Communications and Corporate Services for Scottish Land Commission. As Andrew says, yes, very new, started in the new year. I'm a newbie to the world of land. My background is all in health, so I'm really excited to be here and hear from you all today, and particularly understand some of your concerns and just get to know more about what interests you, particularly when it comes to land. And I live in Inverness.
Nikki, thanks very much indeed. And last, the person who really matters in this meeting is Lisa, who's going to make sure that it actually doesn't crash and that it all works properly. Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Andrew, and hi everyone. My name's Lisa Busby and I'm the training coordinator here at the Land Commission. I've got a mixed background in music and arts, community work, as well as further and higher education. So I bring that to my role in teaching, learning and facilitation at the Commission. And yes, I'm here, I'm behind the scenes, hopefully taking care of all the technology. So I'll disappear now, but you'll see me posting in the chat all the links and signposting that's going to be referenced tonight.
Lisa, thanks very much indeed, and I'll come back to the chat and how that's going to work. But let me just, a few words of introduction. So why are we doing this? So the Scottish Land Commission is advisor to the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament on matters relating to land and land reform. And Hamish, in a minute or two, will give us a bit more detail on that and a bit of a sort of introduction to what we do. But I think it is important to be clear why we're doing these public meetings. So since we began operations 5 years ago, it is 5 years ago, it's amazing how time passes. Every month we've held a public meeting somewhere in Scotland. And those public meetings the purpose of those public meetings is to make sure that we understand the aspirations, the priorities, the frustrations, the joys of the Scottish people in relation to land and land reform. Because First of all, Scotland's a very diverse country, and if we don't get around the place, we won't understand the diversity of experience and views. And secondly, we are a very small organisation. We can only do so much at a time. And so we work sequentially on basically on a 3-year rolling cycle of plans, of strategic plans. And we agree those strategic plans with Scottish ministers each time, every 3 years. And those plans, right from the beginning, those plans have been informed by these public meetings. In fact, the first one, we had a kind of whistle-stop tour of public meetings before we wrote the first one. That was hugely important because it allowed us to tackle things that we knew people were bothered about. And we are, in fact, coming to the end of a 3-year plan. And in September, we'll be submitting to Scottish ministers a plan for the next 3 years. So this is a particularly important time to be holding these meetings and to be hearing what you folk have got to say. So I really can't actually overstate how important these things are. The format that we use, and it seems to work by and large, of course, before the pandemic, actually all our public meetings were in person. We went to online during the pandemic. We discovered actually that people like online public meetings, and a lot of people who couldn't make it to a village hall or whatever can join us online. So for the time being, at any rate, we're continuing to do this online rather than in village halls, which has pros and cons. And if you've got views on that, I'd be interested to hear, actually. But mostly it seems to have pros. It lets people in who wouldn't otherwise get in. The format that we use is that one of us gives you a kind of 10, 15-minute whistle-stop tour to the organisation. What are we for? What are we doing at the moment? And so on. So we all kind of get quickly to a point where we've got a basic understanding of what this organisation is all about. It's then an open discussion for often an hour or so. Well, we found online that it works best if we give people 2 options. So you can either use the chat function. So if you look on your bottom of your screen, on top of your screen, you'll see a wee button that says chat. If you click on that, it lets you just type in whatever you like, and that's really great. So if you've got thoughts about land reform or in any regard, just bang your thoughts in there and everyone can see it, and it's a great way of sharing thoughts. But secondly, and I think equally important, if you want to contribute verbally, and it's good to hear from people, click on the raise hand thing and a wee yellow hand will come up beside your picture and I'll be able to invite you to speak. So we'll hear, so the discussion after Hamish has spoken, it's a pretty free-flowing thing. We want to hear from as many people as possible through either the chat or the raise hand, or indeed both. I may invite some of our people to offer thoughts about what you've had to say, depending on what you have to say, or we may just sit quiet and listen, see how it goes. It's a pretty fluid meeting. It's not structured. It depends how you respond, really. My only commitment to you is that I will finish by 8:30. I promise you that. So if you're panicking about picking up the kids from wherever, it will be finished at 8:30. So that's the introduction. In addition, Lisa, as she's already mentioned, as we're talking about things, Lisa will try and as best we can to put links in mainly to our own website and our own work to help you if you want to follow up on things in more detail. And this meeting is being videoed, recorded, and so if you wish, in due course, you'll be able to look at it back. But of course, you could also just contact us, and I'll say something about that at the end of the meeting. I think that's probably enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Hamish now, and Hamish is going to just do his wee whistle-stop tour. So over to you, Hamish.
Thanks, Andrew. And just getting the slides up for this. Can I just check, Andrew, can you see that?
So I can see the slides, but it's still in the format as if it's on your computer. I'm not sure whether that, Lisa might be able to tell us what to do here. Lisa, any bright ideas? Usually, if you click on from the beginning, you get a slideshow, but it's not giving you that.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. That's that. There we go. Right. Here we go.
Excellent. Well done.
I think
We're off. We're off.
Good. That's our hitch for the evening done, I hope. Right. Thanks. I'm going to spend a bit of time just with a quick look at what land reform is all about. First of all, a quick look at what we do at the Land Commission and an overview of some of the current areas of work that we're involved in. So what is land reform all about to start with? I think for a long time, land reform, of course, has been about the fundamental questions about who owns land and how much land people own and the pattern of land in Scotland. And there's, of course, a long history in Scotland of asking questions and looking closely at the way land is owned and what that means. It's also about how land is owned. So it's very much about tenancies, about tenure options, about different forms of access to land, the structures, the ways in which land is owned in different formats. Increasingly, and particularly at the current time, land reform is about things like carbon sequestration and natural capital. And I'll come on to say a wee bit more about that in some of our current work. Big questions about value in land, how that's been created and what it means. Land reform is certainly absolutely about vacant and derelict land and buildings, and right from very small sites to very large sites sitting in the heart of communities right across Scotland. And it's about much bigger questions about decision making, land use planning. Huge questions about land use change, managing land use change in Scotland, particularly as we move to net zero. How do we manage competing tensions in land? Which voices are around the table and influencing those decisions? Do we have the right information, etc.? And of course, land reform in Scotland has a very strong theme about community ownership and community empowerment running right through it. And we'll say a bit more about ownership and the work around that coming up as well. So I think just want to really emphasise land reform as we see it is really a very wide scope of work, kind of all about the way land is both owned and used, how decisions about land are made, and fundamentally just about how people value and engage and influence land around them in whatever community, whether that is the rural or urban community right across Scotland. The Land Commission, what are we about? Well, as Andrew said, we're a public body set up by Parliament back in 2017. We're here to provide advice to Parliament, to government, but also to everyone out there on the ground, to landowners, to communities, to land managers, and a whole wide range of organisations that are making decisions about land and shaping the way land is owned and used in Scotland. And again, I'd emphasise that while a lot of our work is about legislation, law and policy, it's also about practice and culture on the ground. And again, a huge part of our work and our team is focused on working alongside landowners, land managers, communities, to help people do things differently, help people find ways of changing what we're doing with land in Scotland. And of course, the Commission is a national organisation with a board appointed by ministers working right across Scotland, urban and rural, all about making more of land for everyone in Scotland fundamentally. Now, one of the core kind of reference points for all of this, and one of the things that really drives our work, is the statement that the Scottish Parliament published on land rights and responsibilities. And this is absolutely a first of its kind in the world. So there is no other country at the moment that has the equivalent kind of statement about land rights and responsibilities in this way. And it is a very basic statement by Parliament that, with land rights go responsibilities, and it sets out some basic principles about the relationship between land and people, which reflects how the Scottish Parliament wants land ownership and land use to develop. For example, about the ambition that communities should be more involved and engaged in decisions about land. For example, that there should be a wider pattern of ownership of land in Scotland. And this is something that really frames our work, but frames the work of actually all other parts of government and all public bodies across Scotland in working towards changes in the way we own and use land. So again, I'm sure there'll be a reference point in the chat, but if you're interested, it's well worth a look at this as a kind of core reference point for land reform in Scotland. So to come on to look at our work and some of the current areas of work that we're involved in, broadly, these are the three themes that we're working on over the current kind of 2 to 3 years. about land rights, about changes in land markets, and about responsible ownership and use. And I'll just say a bit about each of these three themes in turn and give you a feel for some of the current work that's going on. Looking first at the land rights and ownership side of things. Ownership and governance is absolutely a core part of the work that the Land Commission does. Government has a clear ambition to have a more diverse pattern of land ownership in Scotland, change the way that land is owned and the pattern of ownership. Community ownership is, of course, part of that. Looking at other models of ownership is part of that. And particularly looking at new governance models. How can we actually widen the range of people who are able to be involved in owning land in Scotland and benefiting from land? One of the first bits of work that the Commission did a few years ago was looking particularly at scale and concentration in land ownership, tackling two of the core topics that have driven land reform in Scotland over recent years. And I'll say a bit more about where that's got to in a minute in terms of government action. But that was absolutely a fundamental area of work for the Commission, getting to grips with issues to do with the scale of ownership and the concentrated pattern of land ownership in Scotland. And this all sits in a context that Parliament set out about human rights. Not just property rights, but how do we actually make sure that the way we own and use land is delivering wider rights, the right to food, right to housing, cultural, economic, social rights, etc. So there is quite a big sort of high-level human rights theme that underpins the Scottish approach to land reform. If we look at where this is going at the moment, huge debate around these issues. We've had 2 land reform bills so far in the Scottish Parliament, and the current government is committed to a further land reform bill, which it intends to introduce into Parliament this year. So I'm sure some of you will have been familiar with the consultation that the government ran last year, their land reform in a net zero nation consultation. I think there were over 500, about 540 responses to that last year. So, a really good, fantastic set of responses going in to help government shape the next steps in Scottish land reform in terms of legislation. Ministers have been clear that they want this bill to focus on addressing concentrated land ownership. And essentially, it's all about introducing public interest safeguards to better regulate the concentration of land ownership in Scotland. And the bill builds on the work that I mentioned a minute ago that we did around scale and concentration of ownership. So it builds on the recommendations that the Commission has made, for example, about a public interest test on significant transfers of land, strengthening the land rights responsibilities, essentially strengthening the accountability, particularly for large scale and concentrated land holdings in Scotland. So a very interesting year ahead in terms of the development of legislation on that's being led by the Scottish Government. But of course, there's a lot more to land reform and ownership than the legislation and the bill. There's a continuing pattern of community land ownership expanding through Scotland. Again, this has quite a long history now, developed back into the 1990s with some of the early community acquisitions, funded significantly through the Scottish Land Fund, but also through much wider crowdfunding and other finance sources. The Land Fund, of course, has a commitment to expand, to increase the funding available during this Parliament. And while community ownership is particularly prevalent in the Northwest, and particularly the Western Isles, of course, we've seen it spread throughout Scotland and increasingly in the south of Scotland, for example, with the Langham acquisition last year. And community ownership has spread not just from sort of large estates or profiting estates, but to buildings, to urban Scotland. Community ownership is now there in the centre of Glasgow, for example, and all sorts of land and assets are coming into community ownership, driven by local needs and ambitions to take control and ownership of whether land, buildings or assets to deliver what communities need locally. Of course, there are rights to buy in Scotland. Scotland's land reform journey so far has introduced some very significant community rights to buy, which provide a legal backstop. And in practice, many of the acquisitions we see by communities now are done through negotiation, negotiated sale between willing buyer and willing seller. And increasingly, we also see opportunities for new ownership and governance models that mix private, community, public finance and expertise in this. So a really kind of still quite a rapidly developing area of work and experience around community ownership in Scotland. If I turn then to look briefly at the work that's more focused on land markets, and really a very current topic. One of the big questions that the Land Commission spends a lot of time on just now is looking at the influence of carbon and nature value in Scotland's land. or what's sometimes called natural capital markets. There are some big questions here that we are trying to grapple with and help advise government on how best to approach this at the moment. We're seeing new value being created in Scotland's land, not least driven by carbon offsetting and carbon value. What does this mean for the land market? We have current work underway, as well as reports published last year on changes in the rural land market. No question that land values, for example, are rising significantly, partly driven by this. What does this mean for ownership, for community ownership, for other ownership? What does it mean for responsible practice and investment? We know companies are wanting to invest in Scotland's land, particularly in carbon. How do we do that responsibly, and what are the implications? And particularly for the Land Commission, how do we harness this for public and community benefit? And we're doing some particular work at the moment, looking at how we actually secure community benefit from some of this emerging value in Scotland's land. So a very current topic, and one that I expect we'll continue to do quite a lot more work on over the coming year. Alongside that, and almost by complete contrast in some ways, I suppose, is a continued focus on vacant and derelict land, particularly in Scotland's towns, villages and urban centres. A few years ago, we convened a national task force to really try and bring a fresh approach, a new momentum to bringing derelict sites back into use. Really quite striking to think that 1 in 3 of us across Scotland live within about 500 metres of a derelict site. And when you think about the impact that has on communities, on sense of place, on economic opportunities, on people's pride in the place they live in, that's a massive impact from derelict sites and derelict land affecting communities across Scotland. So fantastic to see a big focus being maintained on this. On the back of the task force, the Scottish Government has provided additional funding to bring sites back into use. Local authorities across Scotland are also doing a huge amount of work to be more proactive in bringing these sites back into use. But that will continue to be a decade's worth of work, I think, to get these sites back into productive uses. Linked to that, and slightly more widely, we've also looked at the implications of land for housing. And again, one of the biggest challenges facing communities across Scotland, of course, is providing enough housing at an affordable level in the places that people need. Work that we've done, I think, shows pretty clearly that some reforms are needed to the way that land comes forward for housing delivery. And again, there's work published on our website that will give you some more insight into some of the work that we've done, particularly looking at international experience. And again, we found this with a number of areas of work, that it's actually just very helpful to look at what other countries, particularly in Europe, but also elsewhere, do, how they tackle some of these problems. And as ever, there's quite a lot to learn from the way that other parts of Europe and elsewhere address some of these issues. And I think that's particularly relevant in the housing context. And one of the fundamental ideas, recommendations we've made on this is that public bodies and the public sector in Scotland need to be much more actively involved in making sure that land is in the right hands to enable housing development to take place. I'm sure we may come back to some of that in the discussion. The final area around sort of land markets, just to flag that we've also done work on land reform and taxation. And again, there's work on our website that provides some background to this, some background research, for example, on land value taxation. And some of the things that we needed if Scotland obviously moved towards more of a system of taxing land value. And then last year, we also made some more specific recommendations, both about the kind of systemic changes that would be needed to better tax land values, but also about some of the particular reforms that the government could take forward, particularly linked to economic recovery and town centre renewal. So again, a huge influence on the way that land is owned and used and coming through our tax system. And then one of the really big areas of work that we focus on and have quite a large part of our team dedicated to is our good practice programme. And this is where, again, I would particularly flag the opportunity to have a look at the guidance and advice that is available on our website, but also to make contact with one of our team in relation to any particular issues locally. So the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement that I referred to earlier sets out the big picture. And part of our job then is to put guidance and advice in place. And we've published a series of protocols that just set out reasonable expectations for how that could be put into practice. For example, whether it's about engaging communities in decisions locally about land use change, whether it's about thinking about being able to transfer land to others to ownership, diversify the ownership of land, whether to communities or individuals, whether it's about specific things like common good land, You'll find advice, guidance and protocols on how these things can be done responsibly on our website in the good practice section. And we also have a team there that's able to advise in response to specific kind of queries coming up on these issues as they apply locally as well. And this is something that I think is only going to become more important over the years ahead in terms of just influencing change on the ground, and we'll do things well. I'd link to that very much as the work that we do with tenant farming. Within the Land Commission, one of the board members is Bob McIntosh, the Tenant Farming Commissioner, and he has particular functions set out by the Land Reform Act, which is all about improving the relations between agricultural landlords and tenants. So again, a history of some challenge in the agricultural sector about landlord and tenant relationships. And again, through the work of the Tenant Farming Commissioner, particularly putting in place codes of practice that set out clear expectations, and with the ability to investigate issues that arise, we've seen a real change over the last few years and a real culture shift in terms of the way that landlords and tenants engage with each other in the agricultural sector. So again, some interesting experience, but also some very specific advice that's available through the organisation and through the website on agricultural tenancy issues as well. And a lot of broader work that the Tenant Farm Commission has put in place, for example, support for mediation in an agricultural tenancy context, and work to help promote opportunities for new entrants and developing businesses within the agricultural sector as well. So that's a very quick and high-level kind of tour through some of the main areas of work that we do. As I say, there's more on all of that in the website and some of the links that you'll find in the chat. Please also do have a look at myland.scot, which is part of our website, which is more aimed to provide information about examples, case studies, inspirational ideas about how communities are engaging and transforming land in their particular local area. So again, a resource there that you're able to draw on. And I'll also just flag, as well as our kind of social media and other things, please do, if you're interested, have a look at the podcasts. We've got a whole series of podcasts that are available through our website, engaging with different people and their perspectives on Scotland's land, what it means to them in some very different contexts. And finally, I'll put up the address details here, but we'll come back to this at the end of the meeting in terms of keeping in touch with us. So, a quick overview from me there, but I think more important to hear from you. So, Andrew, I'll pass back to you now.
Amy, thank you very much indeed. So, look, that was very much a gallop through the issues and what we're doing, and I hope it was helpful. It's always, frankly, very, very difficult to squeeze into 10 or 15 minutes a sensible account without bamboozling everybody, and we may have succeeded in doing that, but I hope that was helpful. Now, there's a chat button. Like to hear your views. I've already seen something from Margaret Donald on community asset transfer, which is really helpful. And there's I can't find it now, but there is a hand button where which you click on, and a yellow hand goes up, and I'll be able to invite you to speak. And we would very much like to hear from you. You've heard from Hamish what we're doing, what we're focused on, what we have done. What should we be doing going forward? We need to know. And secondly, we are public servants, and particularly Lorne and I are appointed by elected ministers. So hold us to account. You should hold us to account. If you take the King's shilling, or the Queen's shilling as it was, you should be held to account. So feel free to hold us to account if you think that some of the things that we've done are daft. I'm very happy to be challenged. Over to you. I will try and follow what's happening in the chat, but please either use that or put your hand up. Alistair Moody's got his hand up. Thank you, Alistair. Go for it. You need to unmute yourself, please.
Off, the context is the Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park, isn't it, for this meeting? So I was wondering, what are the perhaps particular issues that are coming up within the national park? I live at the southern end, southwestern end in Loch, the Cowal Peninsula of Argyll, and we're in the national park. And obviously, one big issue here is about balance. We're very much subject to the tourist industry. We have a large holiday village that can accommodate more people than actually reside here. There's an issue of housing in terms of balance, with so many houses taken up for holiday lets and second homes and so on. So it's about balance in terms of the land use. And another related one is about how well the national agencies are coordinated between the National Park, Forestry and Land Scotland, SEPA, Nature Scotland, and so on. How joined up is it? A lot of the land around here is managed by Forestry and Land Scotland, but there's precious little consultation about decisions that are made about that land, and does not, really take notice of actual our local interest in our environment, in issues of biodiversity and so on. So it's like, how joined up is it? How good is the communication actually between those different agencies and the communities of the national park?
Thanks, Alistair. So that's exactly the kind of intelligence we need. We're not experts in the national park, or we wouldn't have come to listen to you. We've come to listen to you because you're experts in the national park, not us. So that's really helpful. Let's hear from others on that or any other theme. Simon Miller. Simon.
Hello.
I can, yeah,
you should,
can hear you now, Simon.
You should be able to hear me and see me. Anyway, my question is about the protocols for consulting with communities when you're doing land use planning. So we're going through a development framework process at the minute at Loch Estates Company, and obviously we're holding workshops with all of our stakeholders and with the community. We've probably the wrong word. We've educated everyone who's been involved about the Scottish Land Commission and the hoops that we have to jump through. And it's actually quite difficult to work out exactly what we should do, because the protocols that you've got, I mean, they're very useful, but they're quite vague in terms of what do I do when I get out of bed tomorrow, and what meetings should I organise, who should be there, how should the process work? So they're very helpful in pointing us in the right direction, but they're less helpful when it comes to actually building a consultation process.
Okay, thanks, Simon. So can I just be clear? You feel that the protocols, well, there are protocols for community engagement. There are codes when it comes to things like tenant farming, that they should be more prescriptive. That's your view, is it?
No, but I mean they're helpful, but they leave a lot of questions unanswered. So let's pretend we get to the end of the consultation process, and let's pretend that you and I had both been sat in the wings watching. We might get to the end, and I would think, blimey, we've done a really good job. We've consulted people widely. We've educated them about the protocols that we're meant to follow, and the role of the Scottish Land Commission, and I think we've done a super job. You might have sat through this exactly same process, and you might then nudge me in the ribs and say, Simon, you've really not done what you should be doing because you've not done X, Y, and Z. So that's what I mean. I don't like the word prescriptive, but I suppose a bit clearer about what steps should be involved.
Yeah. Okay. No, got that. So, and that's really helpful feedback. And I think the same feedback goes for the codes in relation to tenant farming. It is sometimes difficult. These codes are written for the whole of Scotland, and Scotland's a pretty diverse place, so it's not always easy. But we'll do our best. And interestingly, the Chief Executive of Scottish Lands and Estates described them as the script that all landowners should follow. So if it's going to be a script that people follow, it's got to be well written. I absolutely take your point. We will think hard about that, and any specific points, if you want to feed them back to us by email, would be really useful. But we'll try and make them as well. If you don't like the word prescriptive, I can't think of another one at the moment. But we'll try and make them as clear as possible.
They're very helpful because they point us at, as a representative of a landowner, they are absolutely pointing them in the right direction. When it comes to running a consultation, it's just a bit more detail, maybe.
Okay, no, that's really helpful feedback. Thanks, Simon. Let's hear from Nick. Nick Wright.
Hi there. Thanks very much. I feel a bit of an interloper here because I'm I don't live in the area, but I've been working on local place plans in Arica and Tarbert and in Loch and Arden with, I should say, with support from the National Park and from Loch Estates as well, which I think is quite forward thinking. Anyway, I don't know if there's anybody from Arica and Tarbert here, but if there is, you're probably better saying this than I am. But what we've discovered over the last 6-9 months doing community engagement there to find out the community's priorities is that in Arica there's quite a bit of derelict land, and there's also 2 of the 4 shops in the 2 villages are closed. Sorry, 3 of the 4 shops are closed, and 2 of them are owned by one person who won't open them up because he owns the other shop that is open. So he's keeping those 2 other shops closed down to avoid competition. So there's quite an issue, especially in Arica, of derelict land, derelict buildings or vacant buildings, which are a blight on the community. And I know the Land Commission has done lots of good work around this whole issue. And I guess I'm just interested, well, it's partly to let you know that there's a particular issue, and it's of all the places I've worked in rural places, I think Arica is one of the worst I've seen to be blighted by this kind of thing. And I'm just wondering, is there anything which the Land Commission, it's probably a difficult question, but is there anything the Land Commission can suggest either can be done now or that might be coming down the line in terms of future tools that the community or the local authority or the park authority might be able to use?
Nick, thank you. You're not an interloper at all. You're working in the park, and we want to hear about the park, and I think that's extremely helpful. I'm going to pause the discussion and ask, really come to Lorne, if you don't mind, because I think this whole issue, there's a number of issues in there, and I'll probably come to Hamish as well on land use planning, but on the issue of monopoly control of assets and community empowerment and community rights to get involved. Do you want to offer any thoughts around that sort of stuff? Contextualize it against Arica if you like, or not.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. On that point there, you talked about perhaps anything coming down the pipeline that might help in taking forward the task there. One of the recommendations we made in the early days of the Land Commission was a proposal for compulsory sale orders. Now, obviously, I don't know the specifics in the Arica and Tarbert area, but just talking generally on that, and that is where perhaps there is a situation of derelict land or land that has been vacant for a period of time, that there would be a process brought in place where that land or asset would be forced to an auction basis, and that would allow other people to come forward to maybe develop it in due course. Now, that was one of our recommendations. It perhaps might be taken forward under the Community Wealth Building Bill, which will go through Parliament at within this actual parliamentary period. So that's perhaps one option there, but maybe addressing wider than that, the point you have made, Nick, but also Alistair Moody, the first point, and also from Simon about the protocols and community engagement. I think it's very difficult when we are developing a protocol that covers the whole of Scotland and a wide range of assets to be too prescriptive. So I think what we wish to do is set out a basis for which community engagement can take place. But hopefully, if anyone wants additional help, we have a very competent, good practice team within our staff there, headed by Emma Cooper, who's the head of good practice within the Scottish Land Commission. And I'm sure her and her colleagues would be able to help on any specifics. And indeed, they have been involved with various landowners, land managers in the past in working with them and walking a way through the process of developing some kind of management plan. So I hope there's something within that that might be helpful to you. Thanks, Chair.
Can I just jump in to second that? Sorry, Andrew, to cut you off there. But yeah, Simon, to go back to your point, as you were talking, I was completely understanding your point about them being necessarily large and widely applicable, but that of course means that it can't be there's difficulty in applying it for specific situations. So what I would just do, Simon, is encourage you to get in touch with us. This is possibly something that we can provide a bit of support with in a one-to-one basis, but we'd love to hear from you, because it may well be that other people are feeling the same thing, and we may be able to build a training program for yourself and other people in the same situation that does that work of helping you apply the specifics. So I'm going to pop the Good Practice team contact details in the chat for anyone that wants to get in contact with us specifically. But please do drop us a line, Simon, and if we can help you in a one-to-one way, we absolutely will.
Lisa, thanks very much. Simon, it'd be astonishing if we got this all right first time. So, I don't think there's any question that it won't be perfect yet, and we'll have to get it. We will continue to improve it. And in fact, if, as Sarah Jane Lamb has said, this is to be a script that landowners follow, we'll jolly well have to make sure that landowners can follow it. So we're going to have to keep working. So point taken, absolutely, and thank you. Hamish, I can see that Thomas McCormick wants in, but I just want Hamish to pick up on a different point, Hamish, if you wouldn't mind. And actually, I saw that Harriet's also on this call. Harriet Donald was seconded to us for a period and did an absolutely superb piece of work on land use partnerships. But Hamish, the whole business of place plans, coordination between public agencies, balance in land use between different priorities and so on. Thoughts on that, and if you want to bring Harriet in, do so, because I know she's thought about it really hard.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, big challenge right across Scotland at the moment. Actually, we're all wanting more and more from our land in Scotland, and some of that does lead to some pretty clear tensions in terms of land use choices, what happens where, and who benefits from that change as well, of course. So this whole question of kind of land use planning and engagement in land use planning is, I think, increasingly important. I mean, in a national park context, of course, you've in some ways got more context and more capacity and capability around this than some other parts of Scotland. And I'm well aware there's lots of good work and deep thought been going into in the national park context, the way that communities are engaged in land use decision making, land use planning, and wider decision making. And Nick, the local place planning process, I think, is absolutely kind of pivotal to all of this. So it's really encouraging actually to hear about the kind of collaboration that you've got there between landowners, yourself, national park, and communities taking that forward. I think you're right, Andrew. More widely, we did some work, and Harriet was closely involved in this, working with us at the time on something called regional land use partnerships, so advising the Scottish Government on a wider approach that they could take around Scotland to coordinating land use planning at a regional scale, and who would be involved in that, and how that could then help shape financial decisions, land use change, etc. And of course, the National Park have been piloting that approach since then. So if I'm not putting you on the spot too much, Harriet, I might just give you the opportunity to say a wee bit there.
Yes, thank you. We are very much still at the pilot phase, and there's obviously people on the call who have been engaged with that to date, and particularly with some focus in the Loch area at the National Park. I'm not going to say too much on it, but I guess if you're happy for me to put my details in the chat and anyone wants to speak about it in more detail and projects going forward and how they can get involved and feed into that, I'd be more than happy to follow that conversation up, if that's okay.
All right, that'd be really good of you. Thank you. And as I say, I thought the work you did previously was superb. I think just to sort of round that one off, there is no question that it's widely accepted in government that this whole question of how do we ensure that land use decision making is genuinely focused on what's in the best interests of this country and the people of this country is very much a focus for government. It's not actually an easy thing to answer, because there are different viewpoints. Some people will tell you that holiday cottages are a good thing, or that big hotels are a good thing. Some people will tell you they're ghastly. Some people will tell you that planting lots of trees is a good thing. Some people will tell you that it's absolutely horrific. So it's a tricky one, back in a sense, back to you, Alistair. Point taken. Absolutely, you're pushing at something that I think everyone's grappling with. So thank you, Thomas. Thank you for your patience, Thomas McCormack. But let's let you in, please.
Thank you very much. Although I'm down as Thomas, that's my Sunday name. I'm known as Graham McCormack, and I think you'll probably remember me from previous previous meetings. But anyway, I was interested in what Nick said about Arica, and of course I live quite close to Arica, just down the Loch a wee bit. The issue, there is an issue which can, this is an issue which can be addressed of hoarding of land or property. And that is by turning land and property into a liability as well as an asset, and taxing it or raising, using it as a principal source of public funding. Now, so far, from my knowledge of what the Land Commission, indeed the Scottish Government, is involved in this, is pretty underwhelming. The comparisons which have been used have shown that there are various different forms of annual ground rent or land valuation taxing in different countries. But the one which has not really been touched on is to dispense with the idea of valuations, but actually occupation, and have land types, so that the assessment is made on the basically the area occupied, and also the land type, and to set a rate per square metre or whatever on that. Now, it's just purely by coincidence, I've been in correspondence with the IMF because they've been doing some research on this, and I got a letter back from one of their senior officials just yesterday, which said, I also agree that a land tax can be sufficient to fund the government. This applies not only to Scotland. So that shows you that there is a huge, there's a huge well there of public funding which is going amiss, which can transform lives. And he also referred to the fact that there is the World Bank holds a conference, an annual conference on land and poverty. Now, at times when people are at their extremity, because of the current financial crisis, energy costs and all the rest of it, I would really be interested to know whether the Land Commission, either whether it has taken part in any of the World Bank's conferences on land and poverty. If not, why not? And surely this should be the priority which they should be putting to the Scottish Government, which I would say is much more important than the proposals which are in the Land Reform Act or current Land Reform Bill, which I estimate that on the current basis of sales, that none of us alive today will actually see the day when over 50% of Scotland's land is owned by over 50% of its people.
And thanks very much indeed. So yeah, well aware of your views on all that. We don't, I'm afraid, go to international conferences, much though we would love to. We don't have that kind of money. And actually, I'm not sure that those are the ones I would prioritize if we were. We've done some work and we have published very clear advice which says that in our view, taxing land value would be a sensible thing to investigate further and does make sense. What we haven't said is that we can just eliminate all other taxes and just tax land. And I'd be interested to see a copy of the letter from the IMF if you could send it to me, Graham, because I think it'd be really helpful to see that and understand what's being said there. That remains in our focus, and you know, if government decides to take forward on the recommendations we've made, then certainly we can do some more work on it. But thank you. Simon possibly wanted to come back on land tax or not, I don't know, but back to you.
Not actually on land tax, no, although Graham and I have spoken about his ideas in the past. I just want to talk about land use and coming back to engagement, and just it's more of an observation than it is a question, Andrew. I think I'd like to say I philosophically disagree with an awful lot of what you say, but there's a lot of important stuff. If I can the point I want to make about land use is we're going through this consultation exercise locally. I'd have to say there's an awful lot of disinterest from our community about 99% of the land that we're talking about. So we're doing this this next 10-year plan for the estate in conjunction with our 2 local communities. They're very, very interested in all the land around the villages, which is quite understandable, and they're very passionate about it, and it's a really important process to go through. When we then start talking about land use and what's the role of mountains and glens that are hidden away in the future, and what would they like to see, it's quite hard to get them engaged, to get the communities engaged, because they don't get the idea that we need to be talking to them about it. So there's a bit of reticence, and it's quite hard to get engagement. The other point I'd like to make is the world of farming is desperately uncertain at the minute. We don't know what the direction of agricultural subsidies is. We don't know in a great deal of detail what the future of the carbon markets is. There's no biodiversity market, although there are great big chunks of land in Scotland which aren't really sustainable in the long term for farming, and they're not great for carbon sequestration. So what they are good for is biodiversity. And I think if you add subsidies together with carbon, together with the commercials of hill farming, there's enormous uncertainty, and I think it's you need to be careful that you don't introduce even more uncertainty into a bit of the economy that is scrabbling to find a future. So I think I'm giving some caution that we're talking about in terms of land use and big chunks of hill land. We're talking about a part of the economy that's very, very fragile, whether you're a big hill farmer or a little hill farmer. And what we don't need is more uncertainty, because it's difficult enough to keep the businesses going and keeping people employed as it is at the minute. So,
thanks, Simon. I mean, get the economics, and I studied postgraduate economics, so I have no problem with that. I'm intrigued. I've only ever met you to best my knowledge once, so the idea that you disagree with most of what I say is astonishing. So I don't know. I barely know.
You, Andrew,
I barely know you.
Andrew, it's not you personally, but some of what the Scottish Land Commission talks about, I find philosophically I disagree with. We're allowed to disagree.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, of course you are.
Not you. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about.
I see. I beg your pardon. Right. I thought you were talking about me for some reason.
No,
that's fine.
Absolutely not.
Very good. Righto. Thanks, Simon. Appreciated. Yeah, I mean, we try very hard to give evidence-based advice in order to address. We don't come from any particular point of view or any particular perspective or any particular political direction or anything else. We are technocrats. We advise government. So we try very hard to do that. Of course, people who disagree with us think we have a particular perspective or point of view. That's the nature of prejudice. Alistair Moody, I'll let you come back in again. I'd love to hear from people who haven't put their hands up, please, if you'd like to contribute, but let's hear from Alistair.
Okay, I thought I'd just comment because I was part of the Loch Goyle RLUPS project, the regional land use partnerships. And I have to say it was a very confusing process, partly because in the beginning, we were given so little context about government policy and what outcomes were looked for from this exercise. But as a community, we did our best, but what we came out with was nothing specific about local land use, but more a list of aspirations about how as a community we would like to be engaged with when it comes to these discussions. It seems to me from my reading actually that it is literally a regional, not a rural land use partnership that's being talked about, a high level thing based on planning authorities. So it was very difficult for us to get past all the verbiage of slogans and generalities to make anything at all of it. So I don't know what outcomes were expected from this pilot. You'll learn actually what we have come up with at our final meeting this afternoon. But it was not an educational exercise at all. I mean, I had to do my own homework to find out what are RLUPs and what has it got to do with our community. We didn't actually engage with several of our own local significant landowners. like the person who runs the main farm in the Glen, or the person who runs quite a sizable estate over at Carrick Castle. So I don't know what partnership that we had. We had a few of us talking about it, and that's as far as I think it went.
Alistair, thanks very much. I mean, I guess the point of a pilot is to learn and then do things differently. And so, you know, I think your feedback, and no doubt the feedback of others, will be really helpful in, you know, in drawing the conclusions. But I'm slightly at risk of repeating myself. But you know, if you're trying something new, you always get it wrong the first time. But that's the point of trying. If we don't try, we certainly don't achieve anything. So, you know, I would urge you to keep going. It's, you know, the point of a pilot is to pilot. That's the point.
Yeah, the question was what was being piloted. We never really understood that.
Okay, so there's a useful piece of feedback straight away. That, you know, some pretty basic comms at the beginning. But I think it'd be wrong to. All I'm really saying is, you know, I do find it frustrating when people think, you know, because things don't go perfectly, therefore we're just going to criticize people. Things don't go perfectly, then we learn and we progress. That's life. Hamish, I'm going to pause again, if I may, and just pick up. There are various threads there, Hamish, so I think I'm just going to pause and invite you to pick up any thread you particularly want. And then I'm going to try and shunt the conversation on a wee bit to some other issues, or you might like to do that, particularly around the issues related to natural capital, because they are going to be so important over the next little while.
Yeah, happy to. So I mean, one of the interesting themes that's coming through there very strongly is around community engagement and the practical challenges of doing that, actually, whether you're an estate or a public body or community group. And, you know, useful feedback from you, Simon, again, about, you know, where interest lies. And I think all I would say is, well, fair enough. And in some ways, that is the point of engagement, is to determine where the community interest does lie, and you can then target and tailor where you put effort collectively to make things happen there. And if there's areas of land that they have little interest in, absolutely, there is not a problem with that. It's you know, again, it helps to try and make some of the connections in this, doesn't it? So at first glance, people may not feel much connection to what goes on way up in the hills, but actually, if you start to talk about the way water flows and flood management and what happens further down, all of a sudden you find a point of connection where it really does matter for people. And that in a way is what most of these conversations are about, isn't it? Is trying to find those connections that people may not naturally have at the front of their mind. So yeah, I would absolutely agree. You know, just give it time, but it's not, these processes aren't expected to have everyone interested in every land use decision. That would be unrealistic. So I think the wider point that kind of is developing and picks up the question of uncertainty. You know, there's a huge amount of uncertainty in what's happening in the land market in Scotland at the moment. And we've talked a bit about nature and carbon value and how that's changing. I mean, we did some work last year just working with land agents to understand what's happening in the market at the moment. And really interesting to hear feedback from professionals in the sector saying that actually they find it increasingly hard to value land in Scotland now. Because some of the old certainties are no longer there, and it's unclear about whether carbon value, for example, is a speculative bubble that is about to burst, or is it something that will last for 50 years to come. And I think we're still very much in a period of uncertainty and change around that. We're doing more work this year that will kind of show how some of those trends are developing. I think it may show that people are becoming a bit more realistic about some of the ideas around carbon offsetting, for example. And there may be a bit of a greater awareness around some of the risks that are involved in that approach. But there's no doubt equally that land values are still rising quite significantly. And there's still a very significant demand from corporate and institutional buyers that want to buy land in Scotland as part of this. So as Andrew said earlier, part of our job is to try and understand all of that, but also then to advise on how does government actually help manage this well, get the finance in to help make the land use change that we need to do, but importantly, make sure that communities benefit from that. And that's going to be an increasing focus of how do we make sure that at a local level, there is both engagement and benefit coming from this kind of change.
Amy, thanks. I wonder just if it would be helpful to just pursue this business of community benefit a little bit further, not least to try and provoke people to put their hands up on the subject, because it is a difficult issue. You know, we know from the wind farm experience that really sizable amounts of money have come into rural Scotland and done some pretty good things in some places from wind farms. We also know that if land values are any indication of what's going to happen, then significant value is going to flow in around carbon sequestration and natural capital more generally. And the question is, how do we ensure that that doesn't all disappear out of the area into the bank account of a speculative investor, that some of it actually benefits the area that's being dealt with? Do you want to just say a little bit? I mean, it's early days, we haven't done a lot of work on this yet, but a wee bit about how that might, what things should people be thinking about? And we'll see if we can prompt some contributions with, you know, some bright ideas from this audience to be helpful.
Absolutely. So we're doing some work at the moment, working with a number of landowners, communities, and organisations that are investing in natural capital, just to explore actually what are the ways that will work to secure community benefit from this. And I think what's already clear is that it's not as simple as the wind farm context. So in a wind farm context, you can predict very confidently the kind of return that will come from that, or much more confidently the return that will come from that. And there's often a kind of a pounds per megawatt applied in that context. We've been exploring whether the same approach would work in relation to carbon and natural capital. For some circumstances, it would, undoubtedly, but it's equally clear that in some of these cases, there isn't a pot of money sitting there. Actually, there's a very significant investment in changing land use, which may result in a big change, but it may not result in a significant pot of money sitting there as well, or not in the short term. So the questions we're exploring are how can investors and or landowners coming into this actually work with the local community to determine what would be a sensible approach to community benefit. In some cases, it'll be finance. And for example, we're working with some who are planning to, for example, give a percentage of revenue from carbon payments directly into a community fund for the community to then spend as appropriate. We're working with others who are looking at creating a much longer term finance fund, putting this into a kind of almost like a mini wealth fund approach to create a future revenue source. And we're working with others who are looking at other non-financial approaches in terms of jobs, community facilities, infrastructure provision, for example, and wider opportunities for benefit. So yeah, really useful just to test people's thoughts and views on what does work and doesn't work in this context.
Many thanks. I'm just going to pause and see if anyone does want to contribute on that theme, and maybe it's not one that greatly interests you. Oh, Andrew, thank you so much. Andrew Poulter. You're muted, and yeah, got you.
I'm just unmuting. One poor example of community benefit I can give you is a local hydro scheme, which was got planning permission. And part of the planning permission was that there would be a community payback to the local development trust. And when we went to them 2 years later after they started up, lo and behold, it had been sold on and the new buyers knew nothing about it, and there was no community benefit at all. So I would certainly urge the planners, if they are doing things like that in the future, to make it a condition, or to make it much more of a legally binding condition when they do grant permission. It should be a lasting benefit rather than just something that can be disappeared when the ownership changes.
Andrew, thank you. That's an unhappy story. Actually, a lot to be learned from the wind farms as well on that. I mean, most of the wind farm agreements were put into contract. Thank you. Lauren, incidentally, I've seen your comment in the chat. I'm going to come on to community ownership and all sorts of different aspects of that shortly. Harriet, you got your hand up.
Thanks, Andrew. Yep, speaking from a personal perspective here, so I live just on the boundary of the national park, and we are farming And we have had a piece of land that has been purchased locally by for investment purchase, and the owner has contract farmed to us a stock person role to manage the cattle on that holding. We're also in new entrant farming, so for us that's an opportunity that I guess I just would like to flag that it would be really good if that could be explored as sort of being promoted. That you know, there are the tenancy market in agriculture at the moment, and Simon has alluded to sort of the profitability around farming, and particularly for new entrants and getting sort of next generation into that sector is quite limited, the opportunities. So yeah, just to flag whether there is a piece of work to explore the joint venture opportunities around sort of, you know, the purchases of land around investment and natural capital. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Harry. That's a good thought. I've just stuck that one on the wall. Now, Nick and Simon, I'm going to let you come in, and Graham. Could I ask you all to be brief, because we are in danger of hearing the same voices, and I'm very keen to hear new voices, and I'm particularly keen because Lauren's put something up in the chat to come on to that. But you put your hand up, so let's go. Nick first, please.
Just very quickly, it's just to back up, actually, really what Andrew was just saying about from work up in Stratharrick and Foyers, especially. Two things about this whole thing, community benefit. One is that I think it's SSE there. I mean, the amount of money that flows from the wind farms and the Monolith is vast, but the community finds it very difficult to get its hands on it because the conditions that the way the money is controlled by the funder puts a lot of hoops to jump through. So it can be very difficult to get it, even if it's there. So that's a big issue, just to avoid that happening again when these things are designed in the future. And the other thing to bear in mind, in a similar vein, actually, is I've seen this in various places, is that when money starts to flow, then the way that money is managed is critical. And so many communities have been riven apart by having money, and then the community trust or whoever it is who's managing it becomes perceived as like a local authority, and it can cause all sorts of problems. So there's a lot of those aren't reasons not to do it, but they're things to bear in mind in how it's done.
Nick, thank you. No, they're not reasons for not to do it, but absolutely at the risk of going on and on about it. If we don't try things, we won't succeed, and we accept, and I hope we do accept as a society, that folk who try things will make mistakes, and that's sometimes a good thing. Simon, your opportunity, then Graham.
Yep, very quick, 2 points. Just to pick up on what Hamish was saying. So last week I was sat in a big room with lots of our local stakeholders, and I started off, prompted by the protocols, started off really by giving a lesson in land use and what changes in land use, what effect they would have on what the land looked like, what it would look like in 200 years' time, what it meant for carbon sequestration and for biodiversity. And, you know, it was really interesting. It's never a conversation I'd have had before, but it prompted a fascinating conversation. And there were bits which people were interested in, and there were bits which they weren't. So I'm really just saying I'd absolutely agree with Andrew. It's about prompting a conversation and seeing where it leads to. If I just talk very parochially about the estate that I run, so the land is steep, rugged, it's not peaty, it's not flat. There are very large chunks of Scotland where the value from natural capital is actually really limited. It might grow when there's a biodiversity market. Now, when you've got that sort of situation, which is predominantly what we have, there isn't really money to talk about, because there's a huge cost up front, and you might be waiting years and years and years for a relatively small return. But what there is the benefit of increased access to look at beautiful things that you wouldn't have seen before. And we had a very interesting conversation about what the land would look like if we could live to 100, and how much more bugs and beasts and birds that we would see, rather than just sheep and deer. So I think there is a value in that, but it's trying to bring it to life is quite tricky. That's me.
Thanks, Simon. And you know, I think not that I know you well, but I do. It does seem to me that there are real efforts being made on your behalf to engage, and that's that's what this is. That's what the community engagement part is about. So that's that checks that. Thanks very much, Graham. Your chance, please.
Yeah, just a couple of sort of wider points, I suppose. When we're talking about evaluations and the difficulty in valuing things, etc. And I haven't come to any kind of conclusion of this myself, but I mean there are countries such as Denmark which have a residence test for the acquisition of property. And how that might affect all these things we're talking about land and property in Scotland. I think this would be an extremely valuable exercise for the Land Commission to look at in some detail. And the other thing is, sort of going back to the first bit, but it's related to this, is the reference to a public interest test, which I think is in this new land reform bill. Given that I think it was previous comments by the Land Commission that around about 60% of derelict and vacant land and property in urban Scotland has been in the public sector, it does make you question what a public sector, a public interest test should be, and who should actually be the people that decide what is in the public interest, because it seems to me that local authorities and other public sector holders have not been particularly good at stewarding what they are responsible for. And would it not be right that the Land Commission should give some sort of consideration as to, who should define or who should determine what the public interest test is?
Graham, thanks very much. So on the residence test, that is in the consultation and it is being considered by government. So that's live. So you're pushing at a sort of, I don't know if it's an open door or not, but it's certainly being consulted on. On the public interest test is about monopoly power. It's not about whether someone's looking after derelict land. Well, it's a test of whether or not there is a monopoly that is not in the public interest. I don't think actually it will be local authorities that will conduct that, but that again is in the consultation, and there's been over 500 responses and I haven't had a chance to read them all, so I don't actually know where that will go. But it's again, it is a live issue. Who should undertake this public interest test? Quite a challenging one actually. Thanks, Graham. Lorne, I'm going to, if you don't mind, come to you and I sort of pause again in this conversation. There's quite a lot of issues been chucked around here about community benefit and wind farms, and I know have a lot of experience with that. They're also in the chat, but not in the verbal bit. Some comments, important comments, I think, about community ownership and community capacity and community confidence. I don't think that word's used, but I think it's implicit. Do you want to just offer thoughts on what you're reading in the chat and hearing on that sort of stuff?
I don't know, but I'm not picking up in the chat anything about community ownership. So I don't know if it's whether it's been just put to you, Andrew, or is it to everyone? But that aside, it was interesting to hear the discussion about community benefit and the unfortunate experience with the hydro scheme that was talked about earlier. I'm of the view that some of the community benefit monies that come from onshore wind farms of £5,000 per megawatt installed are rather paltry, considering the amount of money that is generated from them. And in my experience, a lot of the community landowners that have taken forward either a hydro scheme or a wind farm at their own hand and 100% ownership of it have found that they have had a very much larger income streams as a result. And that has allowed them at their own hand, without having to go through the hoops and hurdles that were referred to earlier in Stratheric, that they are able to use the money as match funding for other projects or money at their own hand for distribution to worthwhile projects in their own communities. What I'd be interested to hear is from the audience, as it were, about potential interest in community land ownership within the Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park. I'm certainly aware of buildings that have been purchased by communities, but I'm not aware of any significant land holdings that have been purchased by communities. Now, I know from travelling throughout Scotland that communities do have an interest in owning land for development, whether that's for recreation, but also for community buildings or for housing around various villages, or for the development of business units, various other things to try and grow their local communities. So I would be interested to hear if there is specific interest in the Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park area in direct community land ownership. Thanks, Andrew. I'll pass back to you at this stage.
No, so let's just open it up. And there's one or two things in the chat, a very, frankly, very to the point comment from Thomas Fisher, which is a comment we hear again and again, which is that people feel, whether they are disempowered or not, they feel disempowered. And that is an important point. It's about how people feel that drives public opinion, that drives politics and a lot of other things. And people feel disempowered in relation to the whole natural capital carbon thing. And that point was made and further back in the chat by Alistair Moody about greenwashing people. Certainly some people feel that the whole carbon thing is in fact not really real. It's about greenwashing and so on. And these things matter. And sorry, I'm just trying to, forgive me, I'm trying to scroll through this. On the other hand, community, somebody else, I think it was Lauren actually said, yeah, it was Lauren who made the point, if communities buy land, how confident are we that communities are going to continue to have the capacity you've used the word if land is given to communities. I've never known land be given to communities. They've always bought it. But the point is well made, and I know it does worry some people sometimes. If communities do become owners, are we confident that they'll continue to have the capacity to manage it well? I have to say the experience to date, for about 30 odd years now, is that communities actually do a very good job, but it's obviously a concern. So let's hear any further thoughts from people on that whole business of community empowerment, community ownership, if you have any. And could I just want to flag the point that Harriet made, but widen it. We have an important role in relation to farming. Lawrence here from NFUS. Thoughts of the tenant farming commissioner function was, in a way, I chaired the legislative review for the government in 2014 that led to the creation of the tenant farming position with the codes of practice and so on. And some people see that as a forerunner for a wider approach to what Scottish Land and Estate refer to as the script for landowners. So any thoughts on farming, tenant farming, as you say, Harriet, other versions of tenant farming, so contract farming, share farming, and so on. Young entrants. There's a whole raft of issues that, if you have views, it would be helpful, because we need to figure out, are there further bits of work in the next 3 years in relation to farming we need to focus on that are not being picked up by others. So let's see what people have to say. I'm not sure, Andrew Poulter, is your hand still up, or are you up again? And if so, please go ahead. Great, excellent, right, good stuff. Thank you, Andrew. Right, go again, off you go.
No, I was just responding to the thing about hydro schemes and local land ownership. There are two good hydro schemes in the area. Callander and Arica have both got local funded hydro schemes, community hydro schemes, which are very successful, as far as I know. And we have just bought a plot of land in Strathire recently with community land ownership. So we do have some experience of it. It is quite daunting. I wasn't involved directly, but it is quite daunting when you see the documents and the commitments financially to take these sort of things on. So it's not a trivial exercise, I'd say. You do need an infrastructure behind and a group of volunteers and everything else. So Ruth could probably confirm what I'm saying. I see you there. I do
Andrew,
have a
thank
very
you very much.
particular thing for Balquhidder, which if anybody wants, if you can spare me 5 minutes on that, I would. A particular land ownership issue that of a local.
Well, can we come back? We'll come back to that if there's time, Andrew. I've only got about 9 minutes, so I might need to. I would just like to pick up Nick's point and see how other people have used. So Nick in the chat is questioning capacity. I'm actually going to come to Lorna for a quick response on this, Lorna, because we do hear this, and people say, "Oh well, it's all very well, but communities don't have the capacity." Is it capacity or is it confidence? Is it the case 75% of the Western Isles is community owned? Do the people in the Western Isles have more capacity? That seems implausible to me.
Yeah.
So what is the issue, Lorna?
Well, I think now community land ownership, there's about 600,000 acres of Scotland that is now under community land ownership. And I think the experience over the last 30 years or so is that communities change over time, and there are times when communities are motoring at full speed, and sometimes when there is less movement. But that is only to be expected, I would suggest, and it's just the nature of things. Communities do have a lot of support out there from various agencies, from organisations that can support them in order to take forward community land ownership. But certainly, as you say, Andrew, you've now got 70 to 75% of people in the Western Isles living in community land owned estates. There's certainly no going back there. The communities have really grasped the opportunity to be the masters of their own destiny and to steer a course forward that is very much in the needs of community. I think that the other side of the coin is when it was raised maybe earlier there about whether there are concerns about communities owning land. You could turn that coin on its head and suggest that private land ownership, private landowners don't last forever. People move on or they depart this earth, and there isn't the stability there in terms of the long term with private land ownership. So I think that's why many people have grasped the opportunity to take forward community land ownership and to create revenue streams that are wholly returned to the community themselves. Thanks, Andrew.
Lauren, thank you. This is typical me putting something controversial up with 5 minutes to go, but we've got interesting responses. So Peter saying, it is a capacity issue. We've then got Alistair and then Susan coming in, particularly Susan pointing out, well, actually, there are communities with the driving interest who are doing this. I'm not going to try and answer this, but it does seem to me that we have to be careful about making an assumption that this is about capacity or that we need lots of retired people, which is the point made by Peter. GEA, for example, was entirely, I sat in on the GEA AGM. I don't think there was anybody over 30 on the management committee. Someone will correct me, no doubt no one will, but certainly it's a very young bunch of people. I guess what I conclude from it is that there aren't any rules. Some places just seem to make this happen and some don't. We need to try and figure out what's going on there. 5 minutes left, and as I promised, I will close down. Simon, I can see your hand. I'm just going to check and see if anyone who hasn't spoken wishes to come in. Otherwise, I'm just going to give you a word and then I'm going to start to wrap up. Okay, Simon, you come in, please.
Okay, I've got a curveball for you. So, Andrew, you're called the Scottish Land Commission. I can tell you one of the really hot topics in the national park is about water and what happens on water and the lack of control that any organisation has on water. We had a meeting so I and our local community had a meeting with Lorna Slater recently. This is about the behaviour on Loch Lomond. And we said, it's very interesting, Minister. You're the Minister, you think you're the Minister for the National Park. In our view, you're not. You're the Minister for the land in the National Park. You don't have control over the water. And I think that, I hesitate to say it, but I think there's an interesting thing going on about the lack of control over water. And I'm trying to raise the profile of what happens on water with as many people as possible. And I would encourage you to think, okay, what's our role in Scotland's water bodies, and trying to make sure that what happens on them is what the local communities are looking for. If you came to anywhere around Loch Lomond and progressively more of the national park, the biggest worry would be they can't control what happens on the water, and that dominates the environment. There we are.
Simon, thank you. Yeah, and I'm very aware of that, actually. It's a particularly serious issue in Loch Lomond. It does apply everywhere else. I was for 8 years chairman of Scottish canals, which are mostly water. And controlling, making sure behaviour is responsible and safe is very difficult. It may be we need to look at legislation again. It may be that bylaw powers in national parks are enough to deal with your particular issue. I simply don't know. I'd be interested to hear more, Simon. Okay, just before I close, I'm going to, so Nikki, who is brand new to this organisation, therefore has been listening very carefully and has had the common sense, the good sense not to butt in with too much. I do just want to offer you, Nikki, nonetheless, the opportunity to just offer any reflections, not necessarily on the detail of what you've heard, but just any thoughts at all. It seems just good manners to let you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's been fascinating just to hear some of your experiences, and also the kind of diversity of opinion just within the local area. And certainly some of the issues that you're talking about, I think, are things that me and my team want to kind of raise awareness of more broadly. And I know we don't have the opportunity now, but certainly one of the things that I'll be looking at is how we raise awareness of the work of the Commission and how we get that out to people more broadly. So I know that we'll be sharing contact details, but if you do have any kind of insights in terms of how we can broaden our reach and people that you think we should be talking to, I'd be really interested in hearing your thoughts on that for sure. And thank you everyone for such an interesting discussion tonight.
Thanks, Nikki, very much appreciated. So huge thanks, first of all, to all the various people who have spoken, and in particular to Lisa behind the scenes, who's kept us all going, really, and kept us out of trouble, and thankfully hasn't had to deal with any major thunderstorms or other meltdowns. So that's gone well, but Lisa, much appreciated. What I want to just ask you, it's a request really. So there's an email address and a phone number which were up before, and we'll make sure that you get them if you haven't got them. They're also available on our website. Just search Scottish Land Commission. So it's always, these things are always useful, but there are always a lot of people who have got something really, really helpful and valuable to say who choose not to say it for whatever reason. So anyone who's got something to say who'd rather not say it in this format, but who'd be willing to talk to me on the telephone, please contact us and I will phone you. I would find that really valuable. If this were an open public meeting in the village hall, you would sidle up to me afterwards and tell me all the things that you didn't want Simon Miller or someone to hear, whoever. So please, if you've got things that you want to talk to me about privately, please do so. If you've got things to say that you just forgot or didn't think about until after the meeting, or they're too long or complicated, please also either get in touch and I'll give you a ring, or send me an email. I would really value that. I mean, particularly if you could send me an email, it's obviously just easier for me to digest that kind of thing. So thoughts, some of you will have thoughts, please feel free to do that. But otherwise, thank you. I think that's been a really valuable evening. We've covered a lot of ground. We haven't covered all the things that we might or might not be involved with, but that's because Scotland is a diverse country, and if we've been holding this in Clydebank, we've got a different set of views. So thank you all very, very much indeed. We will be back, no doubt, with an audience in this part of the country in a year or so's time. But you can contact us anytime in the meantime. We'll be certainly holding monthly public meetings all around the place. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. I hope you have a very safe journey to your kettle or your drinks cabinet or wherever you're off to. But good night and thank you very much indeed. Cheers. Lisa, I'm just going to, I think we'll just close. We can catch up tomorrow or whatever, but everyone's done really well. Thank you very much to everybody. That was a good meeting and I'm most grateful, I really am. And we'll catch up in due course. So take care.
Great, thanks very much all. Yeah.
Cheers.
Good night.
Yeah.